Our military is still underfunded. Under the last Conservative government, when Pierre Poilievre was a minister, that government was spending less than 1% of GDP on defense. And Conservatives abandoned our armed forces and shamefully abandoned our veterans, closing area offices across Canada.
So joining me now is my friend and star of one of our documentaries, Made the Dark Side of Canadian Compassion, podcaster Mark Meincke. Mark, before I get into all the things I want to talk to you about, tell us a little bit about your podcast, because you are the #1 podcast in the world for trauma recovery. Tell us about it. And importantly, how can people find you and support your work? I think that's so important.
Well, thanks. And thanks again for having me on. Every time I get a little bit of extra exposure, there's a chance you might be saving a life, because for a lot of people, my show is all they got, and you got to meet people where they're at. And if where they're at is my show, then perfect. So the show, basically, it started as an augment to peer support, because when I started my healing journey in 2017, after going 23 years without being diagnosed after a war that I was in back in the 90s, I wanted to share that healing journey. And it just grew and grew, and it turned into advocacy, which I didn't see coming, but it just sort of happened. And that's why I'm on here today, talking a little bit about advocacy, because when I became a center point of the veteran community, people just start coming to me and telling me their stories. And that's how I found out about veterans being offered MAID. And so the show covers that as well. It's mostly an aggregate for resources, though. So I find every resource I can for veterans healing, and I bring it to the show. I give them a platform. And isn't it sad that somebody had to, nobody else thought of that? To me, that should be the job of Veterans Affairs Canada. They should be looking around and compiling a list of every resource imaginable, but they don't. And even though I'm in my 6th year of doing this, they've never given me a call. I've invited them probably a dozen times to be a guest. Nope, won't touch me. It's the strangest thing. I can get just about any conservative on the show. The only one I haven't got yet is Poilievre. I got everybody else, and including the active serving Chief of Defense Staff when Wayne Eyre was in, and a former Chief of Defense Staff, Rick Hillier. So I get the guests, but I haven't got one member of the Liberal Party despite all of the invites. I don't know why they don't like us. I just don't get it.
It could have something to do with your explosive Veterans Affairs Committee testimony, where you exposed the angels of death at Veterans Affairs for trying to, I think, clean up their wait lists and do as little work as possible for the exorbitant salaries that they get by offering Canadian veterans MAID instead of the help the Canadian government is required to give them. You exposed Veterans Affairs for breaking the sacred covenant Canadians have with our veterans. And the government is the sort of keeper of that covenant. Canadians love and support our veterans, but you exposed the government for not holding up their end of the bargain.
My name is Mark Meincke. I'm an Army veteran who served with the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry. In 1994, I served as a UN peacekeeper during the genocide in Croatia. And for the record, it was not ethnic cleansing. I hate that word. It was a genocide. Ethnic cleansing is a euphemism. I was on rotation for Operation Harmony. As a result of my service and numerous incidents that happened during my tour, I was injured with PTSD. A fellow veteran who runs peer support put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Let's talk. You should come off to peer support." I'm like, "No, that's not for me, man." But he convinced me, and I went, and it grew. Then I became a peer support facilitator a year later. The veteran, as a result of that this is all about, came to me directly and gave me 2 recordings that were said on Wednesday to not exist. And they are in my possession, and they're on my phone.
Well, I think that has made me persona non grata with with the Liberals for sure. And evidence of that is when I testified the next time. And everybody, all the other witnesses had questions, but not me. Blake Richards had a couple of questions for me, but everybody else pretended that I wasn't even there. So they don't want to talk to me anymore because I'll tell you the truth. I'll tell you what I've actually found. And it's not good.
Why don't you go into a little bit about that? Because one of the reasons I reached out to you was the Liberals are now campaigning as the saviors of the Canadian Armed Forces and the helpers of our veterans. So why don't, before we get into your opinions on that, why don't you tell us some of the things that you uncovered in your work advocating for veterans? Well,
first I'm at a center point in the veteran community. So because of that, I get all the crossfire. And part of that crossfire just yesterday was former General Rick Hillier, the former Chief of Defense Staff, commenting on Carney's wild claims that conservatives are bad for veterans and Liberals are wonderful for veterans. And the overall response has just been people doing backflips going, what are you talking about? Right. That is the opposite of the truth. It's just, and to back up the clock a little bit, I served in the dark decade in the 90s, where it was forced reduction plan. So they were paying people to get out, to retire early, and they slashed the forces. I forget what the numbers were in the late 80s, but I think we had like 160,000 members of the military. That's land, air, and sea, so super tiny. And now I think we're at like 40 or 50,000. Like, it's just ridiculous. We are so tiny. And the barrier to entry is a bit silly as well. My oldest boy is in the reserves, but holy smokes, to get in the reserves, he started the process when he was 15 years old, and they made him kind of restart it. And so he couldn't even get it going until he was 16, because at 16, you're allowed to join. But why can't you start the process early so that on your 16th birthday, you can just hop on in? Just all the bureaucratic barriers to entry are ridiculous. And right now, he can't even get on his trades course. They don't know when the next one's going to run or how it's going to run because there's no budget for it. And this is our reserves that you have to support. That's a big part of our military, but they're flailing. Everybody that I talk to that's still serving, the training budgets are absolutely ridiculous. And it's always been that way. And anybody that's been serving for 30, 35 years, like a lot of my friends have, they'll tell you every time the Liberals get in and there's no budget. And Conservatives get in, it gets better. Not great, but better. So, yeah, there's no Liberal saviors when it comes to the veteran community, and certainly not the active service community. For goodness sakes, how many times did Trudeau skip Remembrance Day ceremonies? I think he went to 2 out of 9, something like that. You'd have to fact check that, but it seems about right to me.
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of Canadians who at least know somebody who has been in the CAF or someone who's trying to join the CAF. I mean, there was a young man close to my family, and he went to basic training early this year, and he would have been accepted much sooner if he had told them that he was gay. Instead, he was just a young man who wanted to serve his country. He met all the fitness requirements. This is something that he has considered for years and years and years, but he didn't check any woke diversity boxes, so he got sort of shuffled down the list over and over again. And I want to ask you about that, this emphasis on wokeness and the lowering of the recruitment standards. I'm not sure how that makes us more ready for deployment.
I got some mixed feelings on it. So when I served in the 90s, if a dude was gay, especially in the infantry, because that's the scary part of the you're the professional killer. So there was nobody that was out then. But not that long ago, I met a fella that served in my regiment in the Princess Patricia's Canadian Light Infantry, and he was openly gay. He was dating a friend of mine, and And I asked him about that. So like, how's that go? You know, like, are you getting a rough ride? Or it's like, no, everybody leaves me alone. Nobody gives a shit. You know, like he behaves appropriately, nothing silly, and he gets treated with respect. You know, all anybody cares is, can you do your job?
Right.
Can you do your job? And that's it. So, and the big strapping dude too. I remember him, but yeah. So, I mean, that's only one story from one fella, but to me, and from the people that I know, I don't know of any gay haters that are veterans. I don't think I've even met one. No. You know, it's quite the opposite. We just don't care. Do your job. Are you a decent person? Can I trust you in a firefight? That's it. That's all anybody cares. But there's this perception of toxic masculinity, and I just don't get it. I mean, my best guess, if I ever have a chance to talk to Jordan Peterson, I'll ask him to psychoanalyze it. But it seems like the Liberals are usually full of betas, and they resent the alphas, because they see somebody that they aren't, that they wish that they were, and they pretend to be, but they are not. And the impression, especially with combat arms trades like the infantry, is, oh, these are the alphas. And I'm not an alpha, so I'll just call it toxic masculinity and resent it because I can't be it. That's my best guess anyway, with my 2 years of college.
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right. I think there's a gross misunderstanding of the mindset of the men and women in the military, that I think it's the soft bigotry of low expectations from the left, saying, you know, like, these guys in the military, they must, because they are so masculine, that they must hate the gays. Instead, they just don't care. Like,
they just don't care at all.
They just don't care. Yeah, that's what I think. And I see it a lot of times, because you sort of get that soft bigotry of low expectations directed at women too, from the Liberals. Like, we need their help to succeed. We need them to protect us because we couldn't possibly take care of ourselves. They need to draft gun policy to protect us, but their gun policy is just, you know, taking away firearms from me and my daughters. Things get flipped on their head because they don't. I think the left doesn't really talk to us, so they don't really understand us.
Best way to protect women is to give them gun rights.
Thank you.